My name is Moises de la Torre, and I will be presenting the Colorado River for Geography 340 for Professor McCabe. So it's located in southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico, and it starts at La Pudre Pass Lake in the Rocky Mountain National Park of Colorado at the source elevation of 3,101 meters. Now it runs through, of course, as I said, United States and Mexico before dumping out into the Gulf of California. So the United States states that it passes through are Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, California, and New Mexico, whereas the Mexico states are Baja California and Sonora. And so it occupies a drainage basin of 64,000 kilometers squared of United States territory, and it is a length of 2,334 kilometers. As for the river flow, as I said, it begins at La Pudre Pass Lake in Colorado. It descends in elevation and flows out into the west, and it goes to the Grand Lake of Colorado. It descends further into several reservoirs, and it first parallels US Highway 40. It joins some of its tributaries, and then it also parallels US Interstate 70. It then meets several of its dams and reservoirs, first being the Glen Canyon Dam, Arizona, which forms Lake Powell. It then flows through some canyons that it carved millions of years ago, such as our 349-kilometer Grand Canyon. And then it meets the Virgin River in Nevada, and it flows out to Lake Mead at Hoover Dam at the Nevada and Arizona border. It also passes the Davis, Parker, and Palo Verde dams. It eventually flows through the Coachella and Imperial valleys of California, where finally it ends at this Colorado River delta in Mexico, which is dry today except during exceptionally wet years, and then it dumps out into the Gulf of California. Now, it is divided into the upper basin and lower basin states. The upper basin are Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, whereas the lower basin are California, Nevada, and Arizona. And they are split at a point called Lee's Ferry, which is here on the map, and this is the gauge point that monitors the flow. Now, in 1922, the Colorado River Compact was signed by these 7 states and called the Law of the River, and it dedicated the apportionments of the water, so how much they could use. Now, they estimated that 17 million acre-feet flow through this point, Lee's Ferry, per year. Now, the problem is this is an overestimation because this was an exceptionally wet year. So when they made their apportionments about how much water each state gets, they failed to account for the fact that this was a really wet year. There's not really that much water each year. And so 15 million acre-feet are divided into the states, 7.5 million for the upper and lower basins, and then in a treaty they decided 1.5 million acre-feet goes to Mexico. Now for human development. So this is Hoover Dam, which used to be called, actually this is not Hoover Dam, I apologize. This is the Glen Canyon Dam. And the Hoover Dam used to be called the Boulder Dam because of the Boulder Canyon Project Act of 1928. It was called the Hoover Dam because Hoover signed this into law. Now what you saw is this is a huge dam, and so eventually they realized, why are we building these huge dams? It was controversial. And so they started to shift their focus from these large dams towards these multi-purpose ones. And so the Colorado River system is actually the first drainage basin where a multi-purpose dam was employed. And so because of a 1963 Supreme Court of the United States decision, it made clear the amount. So remember I was talking about those apportionments between the upper and lower basins. This was explicitly stated. However, the natives got only implicit statements, so they're not actually guaranteed the water that the compact says they should get. Now, speaking of Hoover Dam, so this is Hoover Dam, and it's huge. It's located in Black Canyon in the Arizona-Nevada border. It was constructed between 1930 to 1936. It employed thousands of workers to construct, but unfortunately about 100 died. Now, to put this into perspective financially, in the 1930s, those dollars, it costed about 15 million. 50. However, today, accounting for inflation, it would cost about $818 million to build. So this was a huge process. So earlier I was talking about their shift from these large dams. This is part of the reason, these finances. And so these multi-purpose dams, though, they have several uses. One of those main ones being hydroelectric power and also tourism. You get about 7 million people visiting annually, and a million out of those, they go on tours. So this is just not only useful, but it's also pretty cool to look at. It's aesthetically pleasing to people. Now, speaking about the flow, what are our future predictions based on climate change? And so, if we have this unabatement, so this lack of regulation for greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide, then we're going to reduce the flow. So, natural flow has actually decreased about 15% in the last 100 years, with about 53% of this being caused by the basin-wide warming. So, when you have climate change, when you have this global warming, you have the waters, like in the Colorado River, of the entire basin getting warmer. And that's, of course, going to increase your evaporation, which is going to decrease the amount of water that you have flowing. Now imagine this entire river, all of it being warm and all of it evaporating, you're really going to run out of water. Or you're not going to run out of water, but you're going to have less. And so what you see is your prediction. So by the mid-century, in these different scenarios, if we have a 10%, or yes, a 10%, so degrees Celsius high emissions. So then this is the worst scenario. We're really going to have high flow reduction. Same down here. By the end of the century, the more that we allow these carbon emissions to occur, the more that we're going to reduce our flow through the Colorado River. Now, earlier I was going to mention that we have legal battles. So because the states, the upper and the lower basin, are of course separated, they have different interests at times. And so what you have happening is there are these legal battles. So right now, the current rules, because they have to meet every once in a while to discuss new rules, the current ones, they expire in 2026. Now, if the upper and lower basin states don't reach an agreement, then the Supreme Court of the United States has to come in and make an agreement for them. And so there's this trouble right now with some of them aren't even trying to meet. They're both claiming that they're trying to meet, but not really. And so the lower states are arguing that the upper states, their proposals, are going to give unfair burden to the lower states with the water cuts. However, the upper states argue that they already have shortages based on their reliance of snowmen. And so both sides are picking at each other and they're really not reaching an agreement. And finally, we have our international politics. So under the 1944 Water Sharing Treaty, earlier I hinted at this, Mexico gets 1.5 million acre-feet of the Colorado River water annually. However, every 5 years, Mexico is supposed to send 350,000 acre-feet of water on a 5-year cycle to America through their Rio Grande. Now, what happens is when they're short on this, which of course, as I talked about, more climate change, more global warming, less flow, Mexico has been short on some of their sending of water to America. And normally what they can do is they can ask for an extension, which allows them to get more time to make up for that water. Now, what the Trump administration did is they said, no, you know what? We're not going to give you this water. And so it's really a problem with negotiations because they're not really fostering anything. They're not helping anyone. Now, these are my references. Thank you for watching.